They say being a parent is a full-time job, but I already have one of those. Luckily, I use Instacart to help me order everything I need while I'm stuck in meetings all day. So while Instacart is helping me get groceries, snacks for school lunches, and something for at-home happy hour, I get more time back to juggle my day job and my mom job. Save time by downloading the Instacart app or visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first order using the code INGREDIENTS22. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Delivery subject to availability. Additional terms apply.
The biggest thing that's changed, I feel like, is social norms. Like meeting people and just hanging out with friends is just not a thing anymore. But like now it's, for the last 2-3 weeks, people are working, everything seems to be getting to normal. And so, you text a few friends, but like it's really awkward. I had one friend who said, he has grandparents at home and parents, and he basically is not allowed to meet other people. The other day I was going to meet friends and my girlfriend was like, who are you meeting? She was concerned. And it was like, suddenly you're thinking about, if I go to meet friends, take yourself into consideration, but all the people you regularly meet, it's a really weird dynamic, and it hasn't really quite been figured out yet. It's almost like you have to gradually whitelist your friends.
What are they even saying? My chance new girl watch made in China.
Hello and welcome to China Talk, now posted on Lawfare. This week we're going to be trying something different. I've been interviewing my friends across China about their coronavirus experiences, Gusher FM style. We start off with Dev from Shanghai, who lived through the entire lockdown and has some interesting reflections on the lasting effects of social distancing. Next we talk with Jen, who partially grew up in and now currently lives in Hong Kong, about how her life has changed. Finally, Tianyu, who flew back mid-March to Beijing, went through mandatory self-quarantine, and is currently navigating the bureaucratic mess of QR health codes. I'm planning on potentially doing a few more of these, so if you have a story you'd like to share, not just in China, but about living in Asia more generally, please reach out.
Hi, I'm Dave, and I live in Shanghai, where I've been since the outbreak. So I was in Jiangsu through the initial outbreak. So on the 21st, when she made its speech, and on the 23rd, I think, when Wuhan went into lockdown, I was over in Suzhou at my girlfriend's place for Chinese New Year. And I then made my trip back to Shanghai on the 27th, and I've been there since. I'm not going to lie, I spent like at least 3-4 nights on Twitter and generally surfing the web till like 4-5 a.m., reading as much as I could about the virus. At that time, I knew nothing, things like whether it was really risky, whether it was going to kill me. But I think it still didn't compete with my bigger fear, which was being locked down at girlfriend's family's place and not being able to leave and come back to Shanghai. I was super nervous about that. And I remember like calling friends in Shanghai and other parts, constantly monitoring, making sure like trains were not going to be shut down, that my Gautier ticket was not going to be cancelled and I could make it back. It was about a 4-hour train ride from Suzhou to Shanghai. I remember getting to the station and there was no lines, of course. So whether I had to take my ticket, my physical ticket, go through security, everyone was in a mask. I got to my seat and I took a picture. The only thing that was different really was they had fever checks or temperature checks at the exit, when you put in your ticket into the machine before you leave. That was the only place, and it was pretty non-intrusive. When I got to Shanghai, I was still, it still hadn't fully sunk in. And in a way, some parts of the city were still functioning normally. Like I didn't even feel like things had changed. There was no strict quarantine. I stayed at home for at least like 3-4 days at a stretch. I would only venture out to go pick up groceries. The streets were empty compared to a normal sort of Shanghai day. You had like maybe 10% traffic. You had fever checks at the grocery store. But again, like the grocery store was pretty well stocked. Like there was everything there. I remember worrying at that point. The only thing that I was trying to think back now was that if things were going to change even more drastically. Because like trains being shut down was going to be one thing. Flights being shut down was the next thing. But I could deal with not being able to leave Shanghai. My biggest worry was, am I going to suddenly find out that like that grocery stores are closed, that everything outside is closed, and that there's going to be like rations? I remember to like friends telling me what Shanghai was like in the 1980s before, when Geiger Kaifang hadn't really kicked in. And, you had ration cards for meat and stuff like that. And I was like, if I have to like rely on ration cards for what I eat, that's when I'm going to start getting really, really depressed. I got to know my local Juehui a lot more than I ever did. They would come around to my door every 4 or 5 days sometimes just to check in. They didn't take my temperature, but they would just ask me if I'm feeling fine. And then they took my information to make sure that I would get my ration of masks. They would give me a mask every week, which was kind of neat. In fact, they've been like super friendly and helpful. And I realized a week or so ago that actually they put up like a sheet of paper at the entrance of my xiaochu where everyone's name is, and you're supposed to go and pick up your mask. But they just assume I'm like a dumb lawa, and so they just call me instead, which I thought was super nice and convenient. I never really had noticed like my Juehui ever before living in China. Like it was just not a organization or a group of people that I had really interaction with. But you really start to realize how important they actually are in times like this. Like they are the ones who really implement and like interpret the tongzhe from upstairs, and they could have made life much harder for me. But mine was pretty sweet. I know other people had much stricter rules for like getting out, and that was all up to like their local tour here. I remember getting the app where like you had the 10-cent map where they would show you people around. And I remember I found someone within like a kilometer of me. And this was still in the early days, when you were still a bit anxious how many people were really infected because of the 14-day period. So I live on Changlulu. If anyone's familiar with Shanghai, they might know the area. And there's this one bar called like Nana's Coffee, and they're like the one bar that I've seen that has been open the entire time. Like these guys stayed open till 1 a.m. even though there was no one going, and like they were really impressive. I once like sat down and had a beer there, just for solidarity, because they had football on TV. There was no one there ever, but they were still on. They were still serving, and I was pretty impressed with their resilience. Apart from that, like, where did I go? I remember I walked around a bit. I would go walk around every few days. I mean, Shanghai felt like the closest that it's ever felt to an actual European city, where, like, especially on a Sunday, where you have no one on the streets, shops closed. I never took the subway. To be honest, I still haven't taken the subway since the outbreak. Although now it's pretty okay, and most people take it. I remember when things were kind of opening up, and I mean at that time it was it was the 14th of Feb, so businesses had officially opened, and things were starting to ease up. And I remember I had some friends over in like a garden that I share with my neighbors, and like initially I had 2 friends over, and then we had a couple of drinks, and then a couple more friends joined, and it was just starting to becoming a thing. And then I remember my neighbors came down, and like he pulled me to the side and he gave me like this like 5-minute lecture about the importance of like anquan, and that it's like eating shijian. And he was really like gave me this lecture, which at the time after I got the lecture, I actually was pretty happy to get it, in the sense that he actually impressed this idea of this communal safety, and the fact that they could bring in the virus that could affect them. My friends could bring it and affect my neighbors, and it was something that I think after that I actually paid a lot more attention to generally taking care of the community around me. And I feel like watching reactions abroad, not just in India and the US and Europe, I feel like this community, like thinking as a community, it was something that I thought I was thinking of beforehand, but like this like short rant / lecture from a neighbor really shoved it into me, and I actually appreciated it. I didn't feel like he was being mean or anything, and we had a laugh about it a few days afterwards, because he said that why are like, I understand you as a Lao, I didn't get it, but what about the Chinese people, your Chinese friends? Like why would they there? Like they should have known. And I think that got him pretty taken aback. I'm like, it's kind of like becoming the closest to the Great Firewall, where when you leave China, you're like, oh, I won't have to wear a mask, and that would be pretty cool, like not having to put the VPN on, kind of thing. The fever checks can be a pain, but like they're actually moving pretty fast now. But like just gotta get used to that. Flashing the app, when you go to the gym, the Jiankang Ma app on Tencent, on Alipay, or on WeChat, flashing that, all these kind of tiny things that are a pain. But I feel like, and I'm starting to realize this now, actually, for the past few days, is that the biggest thing that's changed, I feel like, is social norms. Like meeting people and just hanging out with friends is just not a thing anymore. Like initially, even in February and like through parts of March, I never really actively looked out to meet people. But like now it's, for the last 2-3 weeks, people are working, everything seems to be getting to normal. And so, you text a few friends, but like it's really awkward. I had one friend who said, he has grandparents at home and parents, and he basically is not allowed to meet other people. Like he goes to work and that's it. He goes to work and comes back. And if he doesn't, and he prefers to drive, he doesn't take the TTA because of the risk. Like even texting friends to make plans, people are like, "Oh, where should we meet? We need some place that's open air, that won't be a lot of people," and like concern about like who the people you're meeting. Like the other day, I was going to meet friends, and my girlfriend was like, "Who are you meeting?" She was concerned, and it was like suddenly you're thinking about, if I go to meet friends, I'm not just, you don't have to take yourself into consideration, but all the people you regularly meet. So like if I go to the office or meet other people that I regularly meet, like I'm a risk to them. It's a really weird dynamic, and it hasn't really quite been figured out yet. So it's kind of strange, like making friends, like making plans to meet people, it's just not the same anymore. And like I'm still trying to navigate myself through that. It's almost like you have to gradually whitelist your friends. So like there's a few friends that I meet regularly, so I kind of like have them whitelisted. So if I meet them, neither of us that bothered, and we sort of have our routine. But like once you start expanding, especially to like just people, like social gatherings and meetings and networking and that kind of stuff, it feels like it's still super awkward. And I mean, I don't know to what extent this is going to be applicable to people in other countries. Like, I mean, we can see in Europe or even in New York, I guess people are still going out to parks even in the midst of the crisis. So, my guess is this may just be a China thing, but who knows? I know like 2-3 other friends of friends who have been laid off. So it's and this is just, I'm guessing this is the tip of the iceberg. So I feel like the economic effects we're starting to feel now that attention's shifted away from like Corona being the biggest threat. But it's hard to say. Like I've been talking every time I go to restaurants or shops in the mall. I like ask around, or ask the people there what business is like, and they're telling me that it's still under 50%. Like people are not really coming. I was also wondering, and this is maybe because of my own my own change in personal habits, is like to what extent this will also shift like habits among Joling, especially like our generation, who was so used to never cooking and always either Mai or eating out, and just like almost never cooking, to the point where you never really believed that you could really cook to the level of that you enjoyed, and so you just like stopped doing it. And I feel like there's been a big change there. Like Krish Raghav had a great piece on New Yorker on how, on the live streaming and cooking together and the solidarity. And I feel like and I feel like this may actually create some sort of long-term shift where people realize that actually cooking at home is possible. You can actually do it. It can be pretty tasty. You feel better. You're healthier, and maybe you even save more money. And it's like a large-scale lifestyle change. My girlfriend's company, clients, she does AI products for HR, and right now none of her clients are hiring. They all stopped hiring right now. Maybe like 10-15 companies, all pretty large major companies, all like currently have a pause on hiring. I think the effects will sort of come down in waves as people down the sort of supply chain are gradually affected. It's gonna be a depressing year.
Hey guys, I'm Jen. I live in Hong Kong. I've been here since September of 2019. Yeah, so in the first rumblings kind of began, I remember a few friends were in a group chat. He kind of forwarded this article about some sort of unknown virus that was coming from Wuhan, China, and there was kind of some inkling that this might be an issue, but everyone kind of just ignored it and went on with their lives. And this was like end of December, so it didn't really seem like a huge issue. The days leading up to the Chinese New Year, so 23rd, even on January 22nd, I noticed more people were wearing masks, and progressively each day, the percentage of people wearing masks just increased up to the point on January 25th. It almost felt like 90% of everyone of the population was wearing masks. And at the time, I actually didn't have. I was trying to look for masks. It was really difficult, and they're pretty much all sold out. So I was actually struggling to find masks, and I felt, at that point when everyone around you is wearing masks, I felt a little stupid for not wearing one. Because Hong Kong went through SARS in 2003. They really did experience the real impact of not reacting quickly enough at the time. So I think they have that institutional memory that really helped them react much faster in this situation. So I think they're, in general, Hong Kongers, like the way they react to sickness is wearing masks. Like I remember even in the office, just even if a colleague was, just sneezing or not feeling so well, they will wear a mask, even just to prevent from getting other people sick. So I think this is probably a behavior that was adopted after 2003 because of SARS. So it's interesting how that really, I think, helped Hong Kongers react much faster in towards the COVID. And it's very normalized to wear masks, whereas I think in the Western world or in most other places in the world, wearing a mask is kind of stigmatized in some ways. So I actually went to Singapore for Chinese New Year, and it was so interesting in how different things were at that time. This was end of January, beginning of February. And at the time, the Singaporean government was telling everyone, you shouldn't wear a mask unless you're sick. So if you see anyone wearing a mask in Singapore at that time, I would say it was almost kind of stigmatized, because you either are seen as being, someone who is sick, or you are someone who is taking precious resources away from frontline workers, right? Whereas in Hong Kong, the opposite was true. In Hong Kong, if you're walking around without a mask, people kind of looked at you and stared at you and would tell you, oh, actually wear a mask, And there were signs in a lot of public areas that you can't enter restaurants if you don't wear a mask. So yeah, it's just really interesting how these, Singapore and Hong Kong are being held up as models for how to react, how governments should react to COVID. But they honestly reacted quite differently to COVID, at least in the beginning. I think things are changing now, since WHO and CDC have also recommended that it's better to wear some sort of mouth covering. But at the time, in the beginning, Singapore and Hong Kong actually had very different responses, even though everyone kind of looks to these two city-states as models to learn from. So I think the standard on how companies, their policies in terms of work from home policy, they usually follow the Hong Kong government. So as soon as the Hong Kong government says we want, as soon as civil servants are working from home, most private companies follow suit. So for my company, they actually did the same thing. They started this work from home policy, but because my company is very operational, at least some of the teams, they have to be, in the office to get work done, so they actually did an A-B team split. So half the team would go to the office for half of the week, and then the other half of the team would come the latter half of the week. So I think that was a way to manage, just so that if one person gets sick, not the whole team doesn't, fall sick. So that was kind of the way that things are working with work from home. I guess it was kind of strange because you would only see half of the team in the office, and they were trying to be very strict about you shouldn't be, socializing with your colleagues after work. I came to Hong Kong in September of 2019, so that was right in the middle of the protests, and it only got more intense towards the end of 2019. And so once COVID started, it kind of tampered down, or I mean, the protest definitely, like, there was a lull by the end of December, and then by beginning of January, I think, once the virus really kicked in, I think the protest pretty much fizzled out. But it doesn't mean that the spirit of the protest it's still there. You can still see it. And for example, like when I go on my runs along the harbor, there's oftentimes graffiti, under bridges or in overpasses. And I noticed that one graffiti was painted on the wall, and it was directed at the Hong Kong police, and it says, "COVID is karma towards the Hong Kong police." is, kind of indicating like, oh, this a lot of the oppression that people might have Hong Kongers felt because of the Hong Kong police. This is COVID is revenge that to kind of punish the Hong Kong police in some ways. And so I think there's several things about it. The fact that karma is kind of a mentality that I think is reflective of the Buddhist mentality that a lot of Asians or maybe Chinese people have. And it shows that, Hong Kongers also have that mindset. COVID only adds more fuel to people's anger in the way they see mainland China. The protesters see COVID, and it only makes a stronger case against mainland China. And unfortunately, another thing that happened was there was this restaurant that also started. There was a notice outside of the restaurant saying that they were not going to welcome anyone who speaks Mandarin. But they said, but with the exception of welcoming friends from Taiwan. And I mean, obviously this is still, there's two layers. One is that obviously like the protests already created this layer of anger towards mainland China. I think it was more so directed at the government, but now it's becoming way more personal. Now they're directing anger and frustration at Chinese people and Chinese speaking people. So I think this is quite problematic. I haven't personally felt that the protests are necessarily reviving itself, and maybe it's just people are too concerned about COVID at this point. So, but it'll be interesting to see how after COVID, how people might react and whether the protest might actually revive itself at a greater intensity because of COVID. The protest definitely felt like a long time ago. It seems like Hong Kong has just had a really bad year starting from like around August, September. And when I say bad year, I mean, I would say it's bad for businesses. A lot of businesses have been shut down. I know restaurants have gone out of business and, most likely won't recover because simply there's not enough people going out to eat anymore. And certainly now COVID is definitely not helping at all. So I think this is it. It really is kind of sad because a lot of those small mom and pop stores aren't probably not going to revive itself. And the ones that can survive are like the big, chains they don't have as much of the local character maybe. Hong Kong is really a cramped city, as everyone knows. And I mean, I live on Hong Kong Island side, so I definitely feel that, right as after I get out of my apartment, it's almost, it almost feels like it's impossible to really social distance. And also the fact that Hong Kong is shutting down a lot of public spaces like parks or recreational spaces. I mean, the goal is to prevent people from gathering in these spaces, but I think ironically, because there are fewer of these public spaces that are available, actually, I find that more Hong Kongers are actually gathering in like, for example, they would go out for a hike, and because there's so few public spaces like hiking trails or parks that are open these days, so then they actually limit the limited available spaces. So it actually feels more dangerous that for example, when I'm going on a hike, I always often feel like I have to walk by a lot of other people who are also trying to get some fresh air. So it's definitely difficult trying to social distance, and in general, like supermarkets the lines are still pretty long. So it's really difficult to really feel like you can avoid people at all. So a lot of Hong Kongers or just foreigners were coming to Hong Kong, and then you see a spike in cases. And so that was kind of an interesting scenario in which foreigners who, and oftentimes Caucasians are when they're walking around Hong Kong, and sometimes some of my friends who are Caucasian were saying that they sometimes were shunned or maybe slightly discriminated against, which is ironic because, usually that doesn't happen. But in this case, I think Hong Kongers were fearful of foreigners and the fact that oftentimes actually foreigners don't wear masks. I don't know why. In the beginning, at least, whenever you see someone who's not wearing a mask, almost 70% of the time, that person might be a Caucasian or a foreigner. So yeah, it's just an interesting behavioral difference that you would notice among people in Hong Kong. But, I think Hong Kongers are quite upfront about it. I was with a bunch of British descendants, and they were not wearing masks when we were out and about. And I remember this happening 3 times, but local Hong Kongers would go up to them and tell them, please wear a mask. You should wear a mask. And they're very upfront about that. So I think Hong Kongers really do care about this, and they're not afraid of telling people how to act.
Hi guys, I'm Tianyu. I'm a high schooler, but I also write for a bunch of media outlets, mostly on China and Asia in general. So I was actually on spring break when the entire thing was unfolding. I was in Boston, I heard that a bunch of colleges were shutting down. I didn't know what to do. My family is in China. They've been in China since December. So I decided that I'd go to Beijing because I didn't have anyone in Massachusetts when the numbers were like rising up. So I decided 2 nights before that I'd fly to Toronto and to Beijing. So I went to the airport. I flew to Toronto. I didn't wear a mask until I got to Toronto airport, and I went into the line of my flight to China. So suddenly everybody was wearing a mask. I actually think it was mandatory that you wear a mask, but we were basically the only passengers in the terminal that were wearing a mask. We boarded, we got our temperature checked, and everybody on the plane was basically everybody on the plane was wearing like protective gear. So it was like a 12-13 hour flight. On the flight, there were people who were college students. I think their parents who were visiting family in Canada, and then they had to go back for whatever reason. It was basically a full flight. We landed in Beijing. We were asked to sit there for about an hour, and after that, we were allowed to leave the plane. So you had, I don't know, like hundreds of people lining up in the airport for just writing down your address, contact information, and they actually verified it. So like they would make you call their number, so they can see your contact information there. They got our temperature. It was like a scary scene. It was like, because everybody was in like full protection, which is kind of bizarre and surreal. And the entire process took like 2-3 hours, and we were basically dispatched to different buses, and we were sent to the quarantine facilities in Shanghai. So because I was lucky, I was allowed home for home quarantine because I arrived before the 16th, when they basically forced everybody to go to a hotel for quarantine in Beijing. So emotionally, it was scary, right? It was scary because, first of all, you knew you could catch the virus at any time. It was like a closed space, and I'm sitting next to people, and that's definitely not 6 feet away. I don't think my neighborhood actually cared that much, because I was one of the only people who came back from abroad. I think I was one of the only like 2 or 3 families. I was able to get deliveries and takeouts, and the guards would deliver to my door. Later, I mean, in the end, they sort of got pissed because I was ordering too much coffee. But it was mostly smooth. I get phone calls basically every day or every other day asking, like, either the neighborhood people, or is like the police station asking me, are you at home? Are you okay? They even offered me a COVID-19 like test. I didn't do it because they asked me to go to the hospital, which I didn't want to because I was afraid of, cross infection or stuff like that. But it was mostly smooth, and I have to report my temperature twice a day. Oh no, nobody was actually taking the temperature. I just texted them, and nobody verified. I didn't have to take a picture or anything, which would have been scary because I was using I was using Fahrenheit on my thermometer. Like if it says like 96, it probably would like surprise me or something like that. So I was assigned a health code when I first got here. So there are 3 statuses. Green means you're good to go, you're healthy, and you're allowed to go wherever you want. And then there's orange. Orange is you're being quarantined at home. And then there's red. Red means you're being quarantined at a facility, right? So like a hotel or something like that. So I don't know why, but for the entire time my health code was green. So there are different systems for health code. There's Beijing health code. There's health code from the central government. There's health code from like cell phone carriers that get your data from, the places you've been. And my Beijing health code just turned red like a week after my home quarantine ended, and it was like yesterday. So it was really weird. I didn't know who I was supposed to talk to. I called their tech support, and they asked me to call Beijing CDC. And Beijing CDC, I couldn't reach Beijing CDC because too many people were calling them. And my friend had the same problem, and she called Beijing CDC. But Beijing CDC asked her to call her district CDC, which referred her back to Beijing CDC. So neither of us had any idea. Neither of us had any idea who we're supposed to be talking to. So my house code is still red. So if anybody sees it, they might send me to a hotel or something. I don't even know. I don't know what would happen to me, but a lot of stores offer you different options. So if I walk into an office building that has offers me two options, right? So maybe there's a China Unicom health code and there's Beijing health code. I'll just scan the China Unicom one because that one's normal. So it's really bizarre. It feels like it's like the idea of a relevant organ, right? Like what the tech support said was that you should be contacting whoever sends you into quarantine, which I don't know who that is because I spoke with 5, 6 agencies, and I arrived from the airport. I've been in touch with the police station, with my neighborhood officials, with my local CDC. I don't know who that person is, right? Like I had no idea who to reach out to. So it was kind of frustrating. What I found was a pretty big issue that's underreported is that just how much social stigma there is against people who either have catched the coronavirus or who have returned from abroad or a different city or a different province, especially Hubei or one of the places where there was an outbreak. And just I don't think I know any Chinese person who got COVID-19. I mean, I'm pretty sure I probably know a bunch of them, but they just never said. They would never come out and say, I got this on their WeChat movement. I've been trying to ship masks to the US, and turns out the regulations are super strict. So there's a maximum number of masks they can ship, and they can't be medical, right? So there shouldn't be any sign that says it's medical, or some logistics companies won't take it. I was trying to ship 100 masks to a friend in the US, and apparently it was came in 2 boxes, and each of them is 50 boxes. And I went to SF Express, and they were like, yeah, we can't ship 100 masks. It has to be 99. So I had to open everything and just to take out one mask from the 2 boxes. And they had to count the entire thing. They had to open both boxes and to count the 99 boxes, 99 masks, which is super weird. So I saw all these posts on WeChat about mostly from international students who are trying to book private charters to China. They're ridiculously expensive, and I think they're overcharged. But it just surprises me how worried people are, and not unreasonable, but still they're looking for private charter, and these aren't the people who are super rich. They're not the richest people I know, but they're just upper middle class Chinese families trying to get their kids home, but paying 30 grand or something like that one way, which is kind of ridiculous. But I think I understand, even though they're kids, we were talking about middle school, high school kids, or undergrads in college, right? Undergrads in college, that's a little bit different, but I know a lot of high school kids who don't have guardians or parents in the US or in Canada. So I think that actually makes sense a bit. And people were really mad. Oh, another thing was that a lot of Chinese students were really mad, and Chinese parents were really mad when China decided to cut international flights, because the Chinese aviation agency basically said you can, each airline can only operate one flight to each country, which is kind of basically effectively cutting all international flights. So now Chinese students can't come back to China, and a lot of Chinese parents are really pissed. And that's ironically, that's basically the Chinese part in the line for the past 4 or 5 years, and you see the recurring theme being, if you're a Chinese citizen, China will protect you, sort of like, the same idea that we saw in American propaganda like 2 decades ago or something like that. But now, like, all these people realizing that, well, if you're in the U.S., Chinese government isn't going to send private charters to you and then bring you home. Like, I'm pretty sure there are parents who think they're not going to send their kids abroad anymore, just because they're super worried. I saw a lot of like worried parents. Like, my own parents were worried, and they told like all their friends. They're like, my own parents are like, oh, if I had a second chance, I wouldn't send my kids to the U.S. I know they probably still would, but they were just like telling to other people just because how anxious they were. I'm completely ready to start college on Zoom. It's much more expensive than Coursera, but it's the connections, right? I'll still add my friends on LinkedIn, my classmates. That's what it's about.